Jonathan King, 16. I've been telling you about some of the people I got friendly with after I became a pop star and had some success with Everyone's Gone to the Moon. And probably my best friend at the time was the lead singer of a group called the Walker Brothers. His name was Scott Walker. We were almost exactly the same age, almost exactly the same size. We ended up swapping clothes quite a lot of the time, amongst other things. And I also thought he had the most unbelievable voice. And he was highly intelligent, still is, and was a really great performer, but he hated being a star, or rather he hated being a celebrity. Scott would have been so happy just producing records, singing on records, writing good songs, and nobody really knowing about him at all. He hated being a celebrity, and he also hated being a celebrity for the wrong reasons, and the wrong reasons were he was extremely good looking. And all the girls adored him. He was a great idol of the time. Very, very handsome man. And he hated the fact that it was his looks that gave him popularity in many ways and not his incredible ability and talent. But anyway, we became very good friends. We saw each other an awful lot. We used to go on holiday together and everything. I took him down to my mum's house many times. He loved my mum and he had a great time. But every now and again, he'd really get depressed with all this thing. And I remember I used to have to go and persuade. Sometimes his managers would call me and say, please come to his dressing room. He's at the Hammersmith Odeon and he will not go on stage. And I had to drive round there and go in and persuade him to go on stage because nobody else could persuade him to. And I remember a couple of times he actually tried to commit suicide and was rushed to hospital. And I think on the second or third time I went to the hospital and sat by his bed looking after him and saying, Scott, you have to stop doing this. I said, it's so irritating because I'm very busy and I've got lots to do and I really can't keep rushing to the hospital to hold your hand. So please will you do one of two things. Either do it successfully so we can bury you and get over it, or stop doing it so we don't have to worry. And he looked at me in shock and then of course roared with laughter. But I have to say, as far as I know, he never tried again. He was one of the nicest people I ever knew. I still have an enormous soft spot for him, but mostly he was so talented. He had a brilliant voice. If ever you get a chance to listen to his early records when he was singing with the Walker Brothers, which are quite accessible, or his more recent stuff, which is brilliant but rather difficult at times, and you'll understand why I think Scott Walker, or Scott Engel as he really was, and I used to meet his mum like he met my mum, was one of the great talents, in my opinion, of the last century. We spent a lot of time in my funny little flat in St Andrews Mansions with all the extra bedrooms. As I said, everyone stayed there. The one that most amused me was Keith Moon, who used to stay there with his girlfriend who was called Kim. And the reason he did was because his parents were terribly strict and would have been horrified at the thought that the two of them were actually sleeping together. So they used to come and sleep together in one of my spare bedrooms. And he and Kim were the nicest people. Every morning, if they got up early and had left by the time I woke up, there'd be a little thank you note left there. They'd have washed and folded up all the towels they would have used and all the ingredients and all the cutlery and the crockery and the cups for making cups of tea and everything. He couldn't have been a nicer, more down-to-earth, more sensible young man. And Kim was an absolute charmer too, who later, I believe, got married to Ian McLaglen of the Small Faces, and I think sadly passed away a few months ago. But I really liked the two of them, and they never gave me any problems. Another constant guest who used to stay the night at my hotel, as it were, was Kenny Everett, the DJ. I've mentioned before that I became very close friends to Dave Cash and Kenny Everett, who were the two biggest DJs of the time on Radio London. And often when Kenny would be in town and he came from the ship and had nowhere to stay, he'd stay in my apartment. And my cleaning lady, who was a lady called Mrs. P, absolutely hated him because she'd read in the papers that he was an LSD addict and a drug addict, which he wasn't at all. He just did recreational drugs like everybody else at the time, apart from me. And she was also convinced that the way people took LSD in those days was on sugar lumps. So every time she came to clean up after Kenny had been there, she noticed that there were a lot of cups that had been not washed, because Kenny was not like Keith Moon, and there were also a lot of towels that had not actually been put away. And of course Kenny Kenny, having come from Radio Mi Amigo, the ship Radio London was on, and they didn't have very many bath facilities, adored the fact that he could have baths in my apartment and had a bath every 3 minutes. So there were loads of towels around. And Mrs. P used to walk around fully disapproving around the apartment whenever Kenny had been there and go, "Tea and towels, tea and towels." And I knew what she was implying. By the tea she meant drugs, and by the towels she meant just very untidy, dirty young man. But actually Kenny was a superstar. I loved him dearly. And it was very nice because although we sort of lost touch over the years, we always remained close. And when I read that he got AIDS, which he had got, and there was a lot of publicity about that in the British papers, I called him up and we had a lunch, and it was wonderful. We had lunch that started at 12 o'clock and it finished at 5:45 when I dropped him back at his flat. And we gave each other huge hugs and big kisses, and he said to me, "I've forgotten how much I loved you." And I said, "Yes, I've forgotten how much I loved you too." And about 2 weeks later he was dead, but at least it was a marvellous way to close the relationship, which was one of the best ones of my life, I have to say. Another man who was a huge talent, probably the best British DJ of all time.